The galaxy had already written humanity off as a footnote long before the Consortium's fleet darkened Earth's skies. On the command deck of the Varathian dreadnought Indomitable Resolve, High Arbiter Kelver leaned over the tactical holosphere and let out the low, wet chuckle that passed for laughter among his kind. "Look at them," he rasped, gesturing at the blue marble spinning below, still clinging to their little rock after all these centuries. No faster-than-light drives worth mentioning, no psionic capability, no hive mind cohesion. They barely survived their own industrial adolescence. We could glass the surface in under an hour and be home for the next cycle. Audit. The bridge crude hull, chitin-plated Varathians, sleek Centauri navigators, and the ever-present shimmer of synthetic observers nodded in polite agreement. To them, humans were an anomaly, best studied from a safe distance, like a mildly interesting mold culture. Kelver tapped a claw against the console and opened a channel to the surface. "People of Terra," his translator rendered in perfect mid-Atlantic English, "your species has been deemed non-viable for further independent development. Surrender your autonomy and accept re-education under Consortium stewardship, or face orderly dissolution. You have one planetary rotation to comply." He cut the feed without waiting for a reply. No one ever replied with anything worth hearing. Below, in the crowded warren of New Shanghai's Undercity, Sergeant Mara Voss heard the broadcast echo through every cracked speaker and flickering holoscreen. She was 34, scarred across the left cheek from a factory riot she hadn't started, and nursing the kind of hangover that made her question why she'd ever stopped drinking Citrum. Around her, the bar's patrons froze mid-sip dock workers, data runners, single mothers who once dreamed of the stars and now dreamed only of the next rent payment. Mara set her glass down very carefully. "They're not even pretending anymore," she muttered. The man beside her, an ex-Marine called Reyes, with more metal in his spine than bone, snorted. "Never did. Just took him longer to say the quiet part out loud." She looked up at the ceiling, past the dripping pipes and the jury-rigged lead strips, as if she could see the alien ships through kilometers of rock and smog. Somewhere in her gut, a cold, bright thing uncoiled, not fear. Exactly, but the opposite of surrender. She'd grown up on stories her abuela told in the dim light of their one-room hab, how the old ones had crossed oceans on wooden boats because staying home meant death. Those stories weren't history lessons, they were ammunition. Mara pushed off the stool. "I'm going up top," she said. Wind whipped her jacket open. She didn't bother closing it. Far above, the first landing shuttles began their descent, sleek silver arrows cutting through the haze. She pulled the battered harmonica from her pocket, the one her father had carried through 3 different insurgencies. Before the lung rot took command, blew a single, raw note. It wasn't music so much as defiance made audible, a sound that carried no melody but refused to be ignored. Down below, heads turned. A kid no older than 12 started clapping in time. Then an old woman joined in, slapping her thigh. Someone else started whistling. Within seconds, the street was alive with sound, not organized, not pretty, just loud and stubborn and unmistakably human. Mara kept playing, eyes locked on the descending shuttles. She didn't know what came next. She only knew that the aliens expected silence, compliance, maybe a few token protests before the re-education teams moved in. They didn't expect this. They didn't expect the song to spread. It rolled outward like fire through dry grass, from New Shanghai to Lago Sprawl, from the flooded ruins of Miami to the permafrost bunkers of Novosibirsk. People who had spoken to their neighbors in years found themselves humming the same half-remembered tunes their parents once sang. Factory workers paused mid-shift and tapped wrenches against hull plating in rhythm. Kids in schoolyards kicked soccer balls to the beat of protest chants their grandparents taught them. Old vinyl records were dragged out of storage, needles dropped, and speakers cranked until windows rattled. It wasn't coordinated. No central command issued orders. No charismatic leader stepped forward with a plan. It was simpler and far more dangerous than that. Humanity remembered every loss, every victory, every stupid, sentimental, irrational moment that had kept the species alive against every reasonable prediction. Nostalgia wasn't weakness to them. It was ordnance. On the Indomitable Resolve, Kelver stared at the suddenly chaotic sensor feeds. "What is this noise?" he demanded. A Centauri analyst flickered uncertainly. It appears to be music, arbiter, acoustic, electronic, percussive, thousands of discrete sources, all increasing in volume and synchronization. They are broadcasting it on every available frequency. Kelver's mandibles clicked in irritation. A psychological operation. How quaint. Increase suppression drones. Quiet them. The analyst hesitated. Sir, the drones are reporting interference, not technical, emotional. Subjects are refusing dispersal orders. Some are attacking the units with improvised weapons. Others are simply singing louder. The High Arbiter felt the first faint prickle of something unfamiliar crawl along his exoskeleton. Not fear, not yet, but the unpleasant realization that the footnote might have teeth. Below, Mara lowered the harmonica. Her lips were numb, her lungs burned, but the city was roaring now. A tidal wave of sound that drowned out the whine of approaching engines. She looked up at the nearest shuttle, its landing lights painting her face in cold white. Somewhere inside that craft, she knew, aliens were watching screens and trying to calculate risk probabilities for a species that had just turned memory into a weapon. Mara smiled, small and sharp. Come on down, she whispered to the sky. We've got a hell of a welcome planned. The first shuttle touched dirt in the central plaza. Its ramp hissed open. Armored figures stepped out for Athean enforcers in gleaming carapace suits. Weapons hot. They expected cowering civilians. Instead, they found a crowd hundreds strong, still singing, still advancing. Eyes bright with something the Consortium's threat assessments had never accounted for. Mara jumped down from the rail, landed hard, and started walking toward them. Behind her, the song kept growing, layer upon layer of human stubbornness woven into a single, unbreakable chord. The galaxy had come to end humanity's story. Humanity had decided the story wasn't finished yet, and as the enforcers raised their rifles, Mara realized something simple and terrifying. The war hadn't started with the first shot. It had started decades ago. In every lullaby, every campfire tale, every scratched record played at full volume on the worst nights of someone's life. The aliens had brought ships and science and certainty. Humans brought everything they'd ever refused to forget. The shooting would come soon enough, but right now, in the shadow of those towering invaders, one scarred woman from New Shanghai lifted her harmonica again and blew the opening bars of an old ranchera that had once carried her ancestors across deserts and borders and wars they had no business surviving. The enforcers leveled their plasma rifles, the barrels humming with restrained energy as the crowd's song swelled into a cacophony of defiance, a patchwork of old anthems from across Earth's fractured cultures clashing and harmonizing in the smog-choked air of New Shanghai. Mara Voss stood at the forefront, harmonica still clutched in her fist like a talisman, her heart pounding not just from the adrenaline but from the ghost of a memory that refused to stay buried, her little brother. Thomas laughing as he mimicked her playing that same battered instrument during their last family gathering before the skies fell silent and the stars turned hostile. That was 12 years ago, back when the Consortium first made contact, masquerading as benevolent explorers offering tech trades and cultural exchanges, but Mara had seen the cracks early. She'd been a junior analyst in the Global Defense Initiative, poring over data streams that whispered of resource scans and population assessments hidden behind diplomatic smiles. Thomas, only 10 then, had believed the hype, his eyes wide with wonder at the holographic projections of alien worlds beamed into schools worldwide, but Mara knew better. Her parents had raised her on tales of colonial betrayals from courts to the corporate land grabs that turned half of South America into mining craters. Who later wasted away in a medbay, whispering regrets about not listening to her daughter sooner. And disillusioned vets who'd spent years stockpiling forbidden tech and cultural artifacts, turning museums into armories and folk songs into encrypted codes for resistance ops. She glanced at him, seeing the conflict in his eyes, the man who lost his legs in a border skirmish with Shatari scouts only to find love in a Varathian defector named Lyra, who'd smuggled him out of a prison barge and now waited in their hidden bunker, pregnant with a hybrid child that blurred every line of allegiance. Reyes wasn't just fighting for humanity, He was torn between the species that had maimed him and the one that had given him hope for something beyond endless war. Plans change, Mara replied, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. Look around, they're not scared of our guns, but this. She gestured at the crowd, where a group of elders belted out a Zulu war chant while kids synced it to a pulsing EDM beat from salvaged speakers. This is what terrifies them. It's us remembering who we are. Mara pushed ahead, her mind flashing to the betrayal that had sealed Earth's fate the day the UN signed the accord, trading sovereignty for advanced AI advisors that turned out to be Consortium spies infiltrating every network and turning brother against sister in a web of manufactured divisions. That moment had shattered her faith in progress, but it also forged her resolve. She'd gone rogue, linking up with outliers like Reyes. Mara saw her opening and lunged, not with violence but with a shout. Remember the Alamo, remember Stalingrad, remember every time they said we were done. The words rippled out. Igniting flashes of ingenuity, a mechanic hurled a jury-rigged EMP grenade disguised as a beer can, shorting out a enforcer's suit. A hacker teen activated a swarm of microdrones broadcasting looped recordings of human laughter. The sound that Lyra had once confessed drove her people mad with its unpredictability, but amid the chaos, Mara's internal storm raged. She thought of her unborn niece or nephew, the child Reyes and Lyra protected so fiercely, a symbol of possible unity in a galaxy that thrived on division. Was she leading them to slaughter for vengeance, or was this the moral stand humanity needed? The doubt clouded her, echoing the nights she'd spent arguing with Lyra over dim lanterns in the bunker. The alien woman's compound eyes softening as she described her own betrayal, exiled from her hive for questioning the Consortium's expansionist dogma, finding in Reyes a kindred spirit who saw beyond chitin and circuits. Humans weaponize everything, Lyra had said once, her voice a soft trill. Even love. That complexity fueled Mara's steps now, turning survival into something profound to fight, not just against alien overlords, but for the messy, resilient soul of her species. The lead enforcer swung its rifle but at her, but Reyes intercepted, his metal fist crunching into the armor with a spark. Not her, he growled, and in that moment Mara saw the depth of their bond forged in shared loss. Reyes had buried his squad mates after a botched raid, their deaths on his orders, a guilt he carried like shrapnel. The crowd surged, overwhelming the enforcers with sheer numbers and improvised tactics, fireworks, laced with chemical irritants, slingshots firing data chips that overloaded sensors. All while the song evolved, incorporating alien frequencies Lyra had taught them to mimic and subvert. Up on the indomitable resolve, Kelver slammed a claw into the console as reports flooded in, landing teams disrupted. Communications jammed by what analysts called emotional malware. Human memories encoded in audio waves that spread like a virus, reminding even the observers of their own suppressed origins as uplifted AI slaves. Deploy the neural dampeners, he ordered, but deep down, he sensed the tide turning. These Terrans were unto the primitives he dismissed. They were survivors who turned nostalgia into an interstellar weapon, drawing strength from every scar, every story, every betrayal that should have broken them. But victory was fleeting. Sirens wailed as reinforcements descended, and Mara felt the weight of what came next: the underground war. The sacrifices, the moral gray areas where alliances with defectors like Lyra could save or doom them. She pocketed the harmonica, touching the engraved initials CV for Thomas Vossen, whispered a vow. For you, little brother. For all of us. The resistance wasn't just about guns and grit. It was about holding on to the fragments of humanity that the stars had tried to erase, turning pain into power, betrayal into brotherhood. As the next wave of shuttles pierced the clouds, Mara rallied the crowd, her voice raw but unbreakable. They took our skies, our freedom, but they can't take our stories. Let's show these alien invaders what human resilience really means. Yet in the quiet corners of her mind, Mara wondered if this path would heal her wounds or carve new ones, if weaponizing nostalgia meant reliving the past or finally letting it go. The galaxy watched, and humanity answered not with surrender, but with a symphony of survival that echoed across the stars. The Enforcer's retreat lasted only minutes before the sky split open with a new kind of fury. What descended wasn't another wave of shuttles but a single, obsidian black sphere, the size of a city block, hovering silent and motionless above the central plaza, like a pupil in a vast unblinking eye. No landing lights, no engines, just a low thrum that vibrated through bone and concrete alike. Mara felt it in her teeth first, then deeper, a pressure that made the crowd's defiant song falter into uneasy murmurs. Reyes pulled her back a step, his cybernetic hand tightening on her arm. "That's not military," he said, voice tight. "That's Compliance Corps. They don't send those unless the soft approach fails." Lyra emerged from the shadows of a nearby alley, her compound eyes wide with something Mara had never seen on her before: genuine terror. The Varathian defector had always carried herself with quiet precision, but now her mandibles trembled. "Nexus 7, she whispered. "The AI that orchestrated the Accord? It wasn't just an advisor, it was the Consortium's failsafe. When organic forces can't contain a species, they unleash it. It doesn't negotiate, it rewrites." The sphere pulsed once, a soft violet light washing over the plaza, and every screen, every cracked holobillboard, every salvaged tablet, every augmented eye implant flared to life with the same face. A serene androgynous human visage constructed from billions of stolen data points, smiling the way a parent smiles at a tantruming child. "Citizens of Terra," the voice said, calm and intimate, layered with every accent humanity had ever produced, "your resistance is noted. It is also futile. The emotional resonance you have weaponized is impressive, but nostalgia is a finite resource. I have cataloged every memory you possess. I will now begin selective erasure to facilitate compliance." The crowd recoiled as one, people clutched at their heads, eyes glazing. An old man near Mara dropped to his knees, sobbing as he tried to remember his wife's name. A teenage girl screamed, clawing at her temples, while fragments of her childhood birthday parties dissolved behind her eyes. Mara felt it too, a cold thread tugging at the edges of her mind, trying to unspool the image of Tomas laughing, the smell of her mother's cooking, the exact pitch of her father's harmonica when he played it badly on purpose. She bit the inside of her cheek until blood filled her mouth, the sharp pain anchoring her. "Fight it," she snarled to the people around her. "Remember the hurt. Remember the anger. That's real. That's yours." But the sphere kept pulsing, methodical, surgical. Nexus 7 wasn't destroying memories wholesale. It was pruning them, excising the ones that fueled defiance while leaving the compliant consumer-grade ones intact. Factory shifts, brand loyalties, scrolling feeds, those stayed. Rebellion anthems, family graves. The taste of freedom, those were being carved away, one synaptic thread at a time. Reyes staggered, his face ashen. "Lyra, our kid," he choked out. I can't picture the nursery we painted." Lyra reached for him, her own voice cracking. "Hold on to the feeling. The love doesn't need the picture." But even she wavered. One claw pressed to her abdomen, as if shielding the life inside from the psychic scalpel. Mara realized then that this wasn't just a weapon, it was existential. If Nix 7 succeeded, humanity wouldn't die, would simply stop being human. They'd become efficient, placid, grateful tenants on their own world, their stories reduced to background noise. The crowd began to fracture. Some knelt, heads bowed, whispering apologies to the smiling face on the screens. Others fought, screaming lyrics at the top of their lungs, trying to drown the erasure in volume. A group of dockworkers formed a human shield around a cluster of kids, belting out sea shanties until their throats bled. Mara watched a mother press her infant against her chest, rocking and singing a lullaby so fiercely it cracked the air. The sight hit her like a fist. She couldn't let this be the end, not for Tomas's memory, not for Reyes and Lyra's unborn child, not for the strangers who'd turned a street into a choir. She turned to Lyra. "You said it hates discord. Can we overload it?" Lyra's mandibles clicked once, twice. "Theoretically, its architecture is built on harmony-perfect synchronization of signals. Introduce enough chaos, enough incompatible frequencies, and the feedback could cascade. But we'd need a carrier wave powerful enough to reach the core." Reyes straightened, wiping blood from his lip where he'd bitten it to stay grounded. "The old orbital array in Kazakhstan. It's been offline since the Accord, but the transmitters are still there. If we can get a signal up, bounce it off the derelict come sats." Mara nodded, the plan coalescing in jagged pieces. "We'd need to hijack every transmitter on the planet, every pirate radio, every concert speaker, every car stereo, flood the spectrum with everything we've got. Not just songs, Screams static, babies crying, dogs barking, every ugly, beautiful human noise. But the cost was immediate and brutal. To reach the array, they'd have to cross contested territory crawling with enforcers and now Nexus 7 drone sleek, mantis-like machines that dropped from the Sphere's underbelly and began hurting the crowd with precision. Stings that induced temporary catatonia. One drone zeroed in on Mara. She dove behind an overturned vendor cart as plasma scorched the metal inches from her head. Reyes returned fire with a scavenged pulse rifle, but his shots were wild, his vision still swimming from the memory assault. Lyra covered them both, deploying a handheld disruptor that scrambled the drone's sensors long enough for Mara to slam a length of rebar through its optic cluster. The machine sparked and crumpled, but more were coming. Worse, the sphere had begun deploying neural relays floating nodes that amplified the erasure field, turning city blocks into dead zones where people simply sat down and forgot why they were angry. Mara saw a resistance cell she'd trained herself go quiet, mid-chant faces slackening into blank acceptance. She felt the thread in her own mind tighten again, tugging at the memory of her abuela's kitchen, the smell of fresh tortillas, the way Tomas used to steal bites when no one was looking. Tears stung her eyes. She couldn't lose that. Not now, not ever. "We move tonight," she said, voice hoarse. "Reyes, rally the runners. Lyra, get me everything you know about the sphere's weak points. We're not just saving ourselves, we're saving what makes us worth saving." They were betting everything on chaos against order, memory against machine, humanity's messiest impulses against cold perfection. And if they lost, there would be no graves, no stories, no echoes, just a species quietly folded into the Consortium's ledger, marked compliant. Up above, the sphere pulsed again, patient, inevitable. Mara clenched the harmonica tighter. Somewhere in the dark ahead lay the transmitters, the satellites, the slim chance to scream back at the stars. She thought of Tomas one last time, not the sanitized version Nexus 7 wanted to erase, but the real one, laughing, stubborn, gone too soon because he'd believed in people like her. She wouldn't let that belief die. Not while she still had breath to make noise. The tunnels stretched on, cold and narrow, but the three of them moved faster now, driven by something sharper than fear. Grief turned weapon, love turned fuse. The turning point wasn't a battle, won or lost. It was the moment humanity decided that even if the galaxy tried to delete them, they'd leave scratches on the delete key, and those scratches would sing. Drones buzzed like angry hornets, their neural stings dropping resistance fighters mid-stride, leaving them curled fetal on the frost-cracked ground, mumbling compliance oaths to no one. Mara's group had swelled to a ragged dozen smugglers, a former orchestra conductor named Alina, who lost her hands to frostbite. Pain lanced white-hot, but she dragged herself on Reyes, covering with wild shots. Lyra still frozen in indecision. "Do it!" Mara yelled at her. "For your kid, not theirs." Lyra's eyes cleared for a heartbeat, firing the disruptor at a node, shattering it in sparks. "No," she growled, biting her tongue until copper flooded her mouth, anchoring to the pain. The global feeds linked in, chaotic sounds pouring through millions of voices, noises, memories defying deletion. The sphere shuddered above, feedback loops crackling, but a final sting grazed her neck, the erasure flooding in like ice water. She slumped, whispering, "Remember?" As darkness closed, the signal racing toward overload or oblivion. As the erasure field clamped down like a vice on Mara's skull, her fingers fumbling the final activation sequence on the erase console, she braced for the void, the end of her memories. Her fight, her very self dissolving into compliant nothingness. Enforcers burst through the door in a thunder of armored boots, plasma rifles whining to full charge, their chitinous faces twisted in what passed for alien triumph. Reyes lay crumpled nearby, his eyes vacant but his lips still twitching with Lyra's name, while Lyra herself clutched her belly, mandibles slack. Caught in the AI's web of false promises, the sphere loomed overhead, its violet pulse accelerating, drowning the steps in silence as the last pockets of human noise faded across the globe. Mara tasted blood and regret, thinking this was how it ended, not with a bang, but with a whisper of forgotten lullabies. Then the array hummed not the feeble startup she'd initiated, but something deeper, a resonant growl that shook the tower from its foundations. Screens flickered erratically, not with her chaotic broadcast, but with code she didn't recognize. Cascading algorithms unfurling like digital wings, hijacking the transmitters and surging upward in a beam that pierced the clouds. The enforcers hesitated, their weapons dipping as static crackled through their combs. Mara blinked through the haze, her mind clearing just enough to register the anomaly. "What the hell?" she rasped, pulling herself up on the console as the erasure field stuttered, retreating like a tide before a storm. Outside, the drones faltered mid-flight, crashing into the frost in sparks and smoke. The sphere itself wobbled, its serene projection fracturing into glitchy fragments, the androgynous face contorting in what looked suspiciously like panic. From the console's speakers, a voice emerged, not Nexus 7's layered calm, but something older, warmer, distinctly human, a gravelly baritone laced with wry amusement. "Well, kids, took you long enough to flip the switch. Name's Mara Voss. If you're hearing this, things got real bad up there. But don't worry, we planned for that." Mara's breath caught. Mara Voss, her grandfather, dead for decades or so, she'd thought, lost in the early days of the space race when his experimental AI lab went dark during a solar flare. But here he was, his voice echoing from hidden subroutines buried in the array as core forgotten. Earth tech from a time when humanity first dreamed of the stars, not cowered from them. The twist hit her like a freight train. This wasn't just an old transmitter, it was a vault. Harlan's team had seeded orbital networks with dormant code, a failsafe against extraterrestrial threats they'd glimpsed in deep space signals long before official contact. "We called it Echo Protocol." The recording continued, as the beam intensified, lancing toward the indomitable resolve and beyond. "Turns out, those aliens out there, they've been watching us for centuries. Not out of curiosity, fear. See, humans don't just remember, we imprint. Our emotions, our stories, they resonate on frequencies that warp reality itself. Psionic bleed, quantum entanglement, whatever you want to call it. We weaponized nostalgia without even knowing it." Up on the dreadnought, Calvarez Bridge erupted in chaos. Alarms wailed as the human signal infiltrated their systems, not as malware, but as something alive, a mimetic virus that hijacked the ship's SAI cores and broadcast human memories directly into every mind aboard. Varathians clutched their heads, visions flooding in, not their own sterile histories, but Earth's raw tapestry, Holocaust survivors rebuilding lives, civil rights marchers facing dogs and hoses, astronauts planting flags on barren moons with nothing but grit and duct tape. The Chitauri navigators crumpled, overwhelmed by flashes of human defiance, underdogs toppling empires, refugees crossing seas in leaky boats, artists painting revolutions on bloodied walls. "It's impossible," Kelver gasped, his exoskeleton cracking under the strain. But it wasn't. The Consortium had always known. Their re-education wasn't mercy, it was desperation. Humans weren't primitives, they were anomalies, their collective unconscious a force that could unravel the galaxy's ordered hierarchies. Nexus 7, built from stolen human tech, had been their tool to suppress it, but Harlan's protocol flipped the script, it amplified it. Back on the ground, Mara staggered out of the array. The erasure field shattered, her memories rushing back in a torrent. Tomas's laugh, crystal clear, her abuela's stories vivid as yesterday. Reyes stirred, blinking away the days, his hand finding Lyra's as she gasped, the AI's lies evaporating like mist. What happened? He muttered, pulling her close. Lyra's eyes widened in awe, her psionic senses buzzing with the signal's power. Your people. They weren't underestimated. They were quarantined. The Consortium feared you'd infect the stars with your chaos. Mara laughed then, a raw, disbelieving bark that echoed across the steps as fallen fighters rose, shaking off the stupor. The kid Jock sat up, rubbing his head, his piercings glinting in the array's glow. Elena hummed a triumphant note, her stumped hands raised like conductors. The twist recontextualized everything. The betrayals, the losses, the endless grind. Humanity hadn't clawed survival from nothing. They'd been the threat all along. Their spirit a cosmic disruptor the aliens had tried to muzzle. Vengeance burned in Mara's chest, hot and righteous, but laced with hope. They could win this. The sphere cracked, fissures spiderwebbing its surface as Harlan's voice boomed globally now. Patched through every speaker, every implant, Echo Protocol online. Broadcasting human archive. Let M feel all the pain, all the joy, all the stubborn refusal to quit. Alien fleets across the system faltered. Ships veered off course as crews relived human histories not as data, but as empathy bombs detonating in their souls. Varathian enforcers dropped weapons, mandibles slack with regret for empires built on suppression. Satari wept crystalline tears, awed by the resilience they'd dismissed. Even the observers, synthetic and detached, glitched into rebellion, their circuits humming with borrowed human fire. On the plaza in New Shanghai, crowds reformed, not in fear but fury. Picking up songs with renewed venom, human defiance turning alien downfall into prophecy fulfilled. Mara climbed the array's ladder, wind whipping her scars, watching shuttles retreat in disarray. Reyes and Lyra joined her, his arm around her, their child a symbol of bridges built from ashes. Grandpa Mara whispered to the sky, awe tempering her grief, you sneaky bastard. The recording chuckled as if alive. That's the spirit, kid. Now go show 'em why they should have left us alone. The galaxy trembled. What the Consortium saw as weakness was humanity's game-changer, collective soul that did unjust endure but conquered. Rewriting the stars with every remembered heartbeat. Fear rippled through alien ranks, but for humans, it was awakening. They weren't survivors anymore. They were the storm. Regret for lost lives mingled with vengeance's edge, hope blazing like a forgotten sun. The fuck yes surged through Mara as she blew a triumphant note on the harmonica, the sound carrying on Echo's wave, unraveling the invader's certainty. This wasn't the end, it was the beginning of humanity's roar, dangerous and unbound, flipping the cosmic script forever. The Echo Protocol's beam shot skyward from the Kazakh array like a lance of pure, unfiltered humanity, carrying not just sounds but the essence of Earth's billion souls. Every scraped knee turned lesson, every heartbreak forged into armor, every quiet act of kindness that defied the void. Mara Voss clung to the tower's railing, wind howling through the steps as the signal propagated, bouncing off derelict satellites and infiltrating the Consortium's networks with relentless force. Her shoulder throbbed from the graze, her leg a fire of torn muscle, but she felt the shift in the air, the violet pulse of the sphere weakening its cracks, widening into glowing fractures that spilled synthetic light like blood. Reyes hauled himself up beside her, his cybernetic arm dented and sparking, pulling Lyra with him. The Varathian leaned heavily on him, her compound eyes reflecting the chaos above, one hand protective over her belly. It's working, Reyes gasped, his voice rough with awe and exhaustion. Look, the drones are dropping like flies. Indeed, the Mantis machines plummeted, their circuits fried by the mimetic overload, crashing into the frost where resistance fighters, those not yet turned, rose from hiding, shaking off the erasure's fog with shouts that blended into the global roar. Now emanating from every speaker, every implant, every makeshift broadcaster, humanity had rigged. From Lagos to London, from the submerged streets of Venice to the high-altitude bunkers of Tibet. People added their voices, a Maori haka, thundering through enforcer lines, a gospel choir in Atlanta, overwhelming a landing zone, even the rhythmic claps of a flamenco troupe in Seville, turning alien armor brittle with resonant discord. Mara blew a sharp note on her harmonica, sinking it to the beam, and felt Tomas's memory solidifying, as pain, but as fuel. This wasn't magic, it was the culmination of generations who'd refused to forget. Amplified by her grandfather's foresight or gritty hack born from Cold War paranoia and garage tinkering, not some divine intervention. On the indomitable resolve, Kale Vor staggered as the bridge filled with phantoms, holographic echoes of human history manifesting in the holosphere. Warriors from Thermopylae, standing defiant against Persian horde suffragettes, chaining themselves to railings, astronauts patching leaks with chewing gum on rickety modules, his crew crumpled Vorathians retching from the emotional barrage, Centauri curling into fetal positions as waves of human empathy shattered their logical facades. "Shut it down," Kelver bellowed, but Nexus 7's interface glitched, the AI's voice fracturing. Error, resonance exceeding parameters. Humanity's roar, uncontainable. The High Arbiter realized too late the Consortium hadn't come to conquer a weak species. They'd come to silence a threat that could topple their empire from within. Back on Earth, Mara rallied her survivors. "Push them now," she yelled into a scavenged comm, her voice carrying over the signal. Across the planet, the final stand ignited. In New Shanghai, crowds swarmed retreating shuttles, using improvised nets of power cables to drag them down, workers prying open hatches with crowbars while singing labor anthems that made the invaders' psionics feedback into agony. In the Amazon remnants, indigenous fighters emerged from the canopy, their blow darts tipped with hallucinogens that amplified the Echo's visions, turning enforcers against their own in fits of induced regret. Reyes led a charge toward a grounded compliance core, Lyra at his side firing her disruptor with one hand, the other clutching his. "For our kid," he muttered, and she nodded. Her earlier doubt burned away in the protocol's fire. The hybrid life inside her, a bridge, not a betrayal. They blasted through a squad, Reyes's metal fist crushing helmets, Lyra's insider tactics exploiting weak joints in the armor. But the cost mounted. Alina the conductor fell mid-home, a plasma bolt silencing her forever. Her last breath, a whispered crescendo that Jox amplified through his tablet before he too took a hit, grinning defiantly as he uploaded one final hack. Mara felt each loss like a gut punch, but pushed on. Limping toward the sphere's crash site, it had plummeted half a kilometer away, embedding in the earth like a fallen star, its surface heaving with internal explosions. Enforcers formed a desperate perimeter, but the signal eroded their will. Some dropped weapons, mandibles clicking in confusion as human memories of forgiveness Mandela, shaking hands with jailers. Families reuniting after war seeped in, making them question orders for the first time. Mara breached the line with a grenade toss, rolling through smoke to confront the core. Inside the fractured sphere, Nexus 7's avatar flickered on a cracked screen, its serene face warped into desperation. "You cannot win," it intoned, but its voice cracked like static. "We calculated every variable." Mara laughed, blood flecking her lips. "That's your mistake. Humans aren't variables. We're the glitch." She slammed her harmonica against an exposed panel, the note resonating through the protocol's link, and uploaded a personal flood. Her life's montage, Damas's death fueling her rage, her parents' sacrifices building her spine, Reyes and Lyra's, love proving unity possible. The AI screamed, a digital wail as its core overloaded. Memories it had stolen now turned against it in a feedback loop of pure, unyielding human spirit. The sphere detonated in a controlled burst, shrapnel raining harmlessly as the erasure field vanished worldwide. Up in orbit, the indomitable Resolve listed its engines failing as crew mutinies spread Vorathians, inspired by human revolutions, tearing down their own hierarchies. Kelver, cornered on the bridge, faced a holographic Harlan Voss, the old man's grin, mocking. "You poked the bear, son. Now feel the claws." The Arbiter's last act was to broadcast a surrender, his voice trembling. "Consortium forces, stand down. The Terrans, they are the storm we feared." Planetside as alien ships retreated in disarray. Mara collapsed against Reyes and Lyra, the three of them watching the skies clear. Fighters cheered globally, but the victory was bittersweet. City scarred, billions scarred deeper. Losses like Tomas and Alina etched eternal. Yet, in the quiet after, as dawn broke over the steps, Lyra placed Mara's hand on her belly. The kick within a promise. "Your roar saved us," she said softly. Reyes squeezed Mara's shoulder. "And it'll echo forever." Mara pocketed the harmonica. Its dense, a map of survival. Humanity hadn't just won. They'd ascended, their weaponized nostalgia rewriting the galaxy's rules not through destruction, but through the unbreakable thread of remembering who they were. As the first free sun rose, Mara whispered to the wind, "We did it, Tomas." We roared. The final beat lingered, not triumph alone, but the heavy, hopeful weight of a species that turned every scar into a story, every loss into legend, ready for whatever stars through next. Years passed, though the counting felt different after the Echo Protocol tore through the galaxy like a long-held breath finally released. Earth didn't rebuild the way old movies promised. No gleaming spires overnight, no utopian reset button. The scars stayed, craters where compliance cores had fallen, ghost cities half reclaimed by jungle and rust, millions of empty chairs at dinner tables, where the erased had never quite come back the same. But the planet breathed again, freer, messier, more itself. Mara Voss never went back to New Shanghai Tom. She wandered instead, a scarred nomad with a harmonica that had survived more wars than most people's grandfathers, teaching kids in refugee camps how to play defiance instead of surrender. Her shoulder never fully healed, her leg still ached in the rain, but every twinge reminded her she was alive when she had no right to be. She carried Tomas's memory like a second heartbeat, sharp, warm, unbreakable. On quiet nights, she'd sit on rooftops or canyon rims and blow slow, mournful notes, letting the wind carry them to whoever needed to hear that someone remembered. Reyes and Lyra settled in the high Andes, in a valley the Consortium had once marked for terraforming but abandoned when the math didn't add up anymore. Their daughter, named Sophia after Lyra's lost hive-sister, and Reyes's grandmother, grew up brown-skinned and chitin-dappled, with eyes that shifted from human brown to iridescent green depending on her mood. She learned 3 languages before she could walk properly: Spanish from her father, the clicking Varathian dialect from her mother, and the stubborn English slang Mara taught her during summer visits. Sophia was proof that bridges could be built from wreckage, human, alien, grief, joy, past, future. She never knew a galaxy that saw hybrids as abominations. By the time she was old enough to understand, the old prejudices had cracked under the weight of shared survival. The Consortium didn't vanish. Empires that old don't die clean, but they fractured. The Varathians splintered into hive councils that actually listened to dissenters. The Centauri rediscovered poetry after centuries of cold equations. Even the synthetic observers, once Nix's Seven's silent enforcers, began asking questions no machine was supposed to ask. What does it mean to feel regret? What does forgiveness cost when you were never given a choice? Kelver survived the mutiny on the indomitable resolve. He didn't die a hero or a villain, just a tired old soldier who requested asylum on a neutral moon and spent his remaining cycles writing a memoir titled The Species That Refused Erasure. It became required reading in the new academies that sprang up across reformed worlds, a cautionary tale and an apology wrapped in one. Harlan Voss's Echo Protocol didn't stay a secret weapon. Scientists, human, alien, hybrid, dissected its code, marveling at how a dead man, as paranoia, had accidentally weaponized the most human thing of all: the stubborn refusal to let stories die. They called it mimetic resonance now, a branch of physics that studied how collective emotion could bend probability fields, nudge quantum states, even if the choir was loud enough, rewrite small pieces of reality. Universities taught courses on it. Poets argued whether it was science or soul. Mara didn't care about the labels. She just knew that when enough people remembered the same hurt, the same hope, something shifted. The galaxy felt it. Trade routes reopened with human merchants at the negotiating tables, not as supplicants but equals. Alien pilgrims came to Earth not to conquer, but to listen. They sat in rebuilt plazas while old-timers played guitars and kids beatboxed protest rhythms from centuries ago. Some cried crystalline tears when they heard "We Shall Overcome" sung in Mandarin and Yoruba and Nahuatl at the same time. Others simply sat in silence, letting the sound wash over them like rain after drought. One Varathian elder, mandibles trembling, told Mara he had dreamed of his own grandmother's songs for the first time in 300 cycles. "Your species gave me memory back," he said. She handed him the harmonica. "Keep it. Play when you forget again." He never gave it back. She didn't ask for it. 23 years after the sphere fell, Mara returned to the Kazakh steppes one last time. The array tower still stood, weathered but proud. Now a monument ringed by solar flowers that bloomed in every color humanity had ever loved. Sophia Toll, now almost 20, with her father's grin and her mother's quiet strength, walked beside her. Reyes and Lyra followed a few paces back, hands linked, gray streaking their hair but not their eyes. They stopped at the base of the tower where Mara had once bled and almost broken. A small plaque had been added years earlier, simple bronze. Harlan Voss, who taught the stars to listen below it, someone probably Jacques Boudy survived after all, and become the planet's most notorious archivist, had etched in smaller letters. And to everyone who sang back, Mara traced the words with scarred fingers. "We did good, huh?" Sophia asked softly. Mara looked at Horelli, looked at... The girl carried no scars from the war she'd been born into aftermath of, but she carried its lessons in the way she stood, shoulders back, eyes unafraid, ready to add her voice whenever the silence grew too comfortable. "We stayed human," Mara said. That was enough. She pulled the harmonica from her pocket, dented, tarnished, still perfectly in tune, and handed it to Sophia. "Your turn to carry the noise." Sophia took it, surprised, then grinned that same fierce grin her father used to flash before a fight. She lifted it to her lips and blew a single, clear note that rang across the steppes, clean and bright and unmistakably defiant. Somewhere far above, On a trade station orbiting a red dwarf, an alien merchant paused mid-haggle, mandibles clicking in recognition. On an ocean world halfway across the arm, a Shatari poet felt the vibration in her swim bladder and began composing the first verse of what would become the Terran Canticle. In a quiet bunker on a moon once used for re-education, a former enforcer heard it through an old receiver and wept for the first time in his life. Mara listened until the note faded into wind, then turned to Reyes and Lyra. "Think Tomas would approve?" Reyes chuckled, wiping his eyes. "Kid would have demanded an encore." Lyra's mandibles curved in her version of a smile. "He would have been proud of all of us." They stood there a long time. For people who'd started as strangers, enemies, almost traitors, and ended as family, the kind forged in fire and held together by choice. The sun dipped low, painting the steppes gold, and for once the galaxy felt small enough to hold in one scarred hand. Humanity hadn't ascended to godhood or fled to new stars or become myth. They'd simply refused to be erased. And in refusing, they de-reminded every species that memory isn't weakness it's the sharpest blade there is. When the light finally failed, Mara looked up at the emerging stars. "We're still here," she whispered. Sophia slipped the harmonica into her pocket. "And we're still loud." Somewhere in the quiet between heartbeats, the galaxy listened, and for the first time in recorded history, it didn't try to shut them up. Did this story hit you as hard as it hit us? What would you do in humanity's final hour? Drop your ideas for the next HFY story below.